Russell, how'd you find yourself involved in the humic substances industry? Kind of a strange place to end up.
Not everybody wakes up and says, "Hey, I'm going to join the humic industry." And I was actually born and raised in the industry. My father opened our mine in the early 80s. There I was, a 9-year-old kid out there sticking sticks of dynamite while he drilled the holes. So, family industry, I've been around it my entire life.
Is that a mine that he put into production himself, or did it even go back to his like dad or even further back?
No, he put it in himself. Actually, there's a part of it's a sad story. So my father was in the coal mining industry, and there was a mine fire called the Wilburg Mine Fire. And at that time, he was a coal miner. And because of the fire, he said, you know what, maybe this is not a life for me and my kids. And he started searching other industries. And he was out helping some teams on the desert, and they were looking for other mineral deposits. And they found our deposit. They were looking for tar sands and oil shales, kind of part of the Superfund money in the 80s. And this wasn't what they were looking for. And the chemist said, well, it might make a good fertilizer or something. And they moved on. So my father actually placed the claims, and I think back then it cost $50 and opened our mine.
Right on. It's a really cool story. And just right there, I think that might have some people scratching their heads because they hear mining and they think humic acid, and they're not, might have trouble bridging the two together. And I know there's a lot of sources of humic acid, but from a mining perspective, can you talk about the mine that you guys have and how and what type of humic acids derive from that?
Sure. So we'll just kind of go from a macro view about humic substances and kind of narrow it down. So humic substances are the end result of decomposition. So compost, manure, peat, all of those things ultimately after they break down will convert into a humic or fulvic acid. That's the end result of their decomposition cycle through microbial activity. So each humic acid deposit will vary based on age, rank, parent material, the things that you can imagine. The deposit we're mining now is like the Amazon forest millions of years ago. That's all it is all that old plant material that's stacked up. So there's several occurrences of those plant type deposits over the millions of years. So you'll see humic deposits that are 20,000 years old, and some like ours that are millions of years old. But that's all it is basically an ancient forest is what we're digging up, what would be the forest floor. So humic substances, they're common. They're in every soil and every water in the world. It's just these deposits are very concentrated because of that plant material that formed them.
From a lot of movies, you think Jurassic Park and stuff, things that have decayed over time result in all sorts of different substances from diamonds, enough organic matter decomposes, put under pressure, you get diamonds. And further up that scale is coal. And then maybe I'll even put peat. I know peat's formed in a bog, so it's like an anaerobic condition. But where does humic substances, where do they fall kind of between forest floor material as if we walked out in the forest today and dug down a little bit into the soil and coal?
Yeah. So, you covered a couple of really good points. And eventually, yeah, with enough heat and pressure, our deposit would have turned into diamonds. But it's sure good that we caught that before that happened. We didn't want to ruin such a good resource.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, but yeah, you have a humification process and then a coalification process. And the humification process is actually taking those plant components like cellulose, lignins, hemicellulose, things that made up the cell walls. The microbes are destroying them, breaking them down. What happens is they get broken down to where the microbes aren't eating them anymore, and they start kind of polymerizing and recombining. And that process is your humification process. And then later, when you have heat and pressure, it turns them into hydrocarbons and actually makes coals and those other things. So we're kind of in the middle between a peat bog and having the heat and pressure to eventually turn that peat into coal. So you've got kind of that. If you were doing a rainbow, where peat is on one side and then coal on the other, you would be somewhere in the middle where you no longer have recognizable plant tissue. You couldn't look in there and say, oh, there's some roots or leaves. It's all been broken down by the microbes.
Yeah, my past life was in the mining industry. I actually graduated from college as a mining engineer, so I worked in sand and gravel when I first moved out to California. So a lot of experience in that sector. And, looking at the open pit behind you that people can see who are watching this, you can clearly see stratified layers or horizontal bands across the face of that open pit. In the type of substances that you're mining, how thick is the layer of humic substances?
So our humate deposit, they call humate deposits a little bit differently in the world. So ours is a humic shale. And what would differentiate us from a leonardite is the humic shale has a little bit more of a clay component. So leonardite and humic shale, they're kissing cousins. But this humate deposit that we mine here, the band you see behind me is about 15 feet with about 8 feet of sandstone on top. That thick black layer up there, that up is sandstone, and from there down is just the organic deposit. And that's about 15 feet, and it will vary. These are ancient hills and stuff like that, so it'll get thicker and thinner. And the geologists tell us it's a semi-tropical forest, so that's what we're mining.
Is there a variance in the quality of it? If you skim off, say, the top, or can you tell anything from color?
Yeah, color gives you an indicator on the humic, and believe it or not, and we actually give T-shirts out for people to visit the mine and say, "I licked a rock at the Rockland mine." That's the name of our mine. But a lot of times our miners are actually licking the rocks to taste quality, so you can actually taste the fulvic acid. It'll be kind of tart, and so when we're grading it, our mine we extract ingredients that are used in dietary supplements, cosmetics, animal feeds, and fertilizers. And so we try to use the best of the best for our dietary supplement side, and then the rest kind of goes into agriculture. And on the dietary supplement side, that's what we're out doing. We're out tasting the rocks and say, "Yep, we're grading this for the food side."
So you have fulvic acid, you have humic acid. What's the difference between the two?
Sure. So humic substances is a category. I think of humic substances like cars. When you talk about humic acid, fulvic acid, or human, you're kind of describing the different sizes of carbs. So fulvic acid is the smallest of the molecular weights. It's also soluble at all pH. So that means if you mix it with anything, it's not going to convert to a gel. It's not going to be problematic in your spray solutions, anything like that. So it's cell permeable and smallest. That's our fulvic acid. Humic acid is a middle grouping of molecular weights, and it's only alkaline soluble. So when you mix that with a really acid fertilizer or something, it'll gel. So it's a kind of a pro tip when you're mixing these things that make sure to pay attention to pH with humic acid because it can gel. And then the human it's spelled Humin. Human is insoluble. It's the insoluble fraction of humic substances. Now these are groupings. So just like within a small cars, or there's all different kind of varieties of cars. Same thing with fulvic acids. If you took a fulvic acid solution and analyzed it, said all these organic acids, how many are in there? We sent off a solution, and there was about 6,000 different combinations of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in that fulvic solution. So there's not one specific. It's like saying this snowflake is like every other snowflake. It's the same thing with fulvic acids. They're all going to be they're put together remnants, so they're going to be all slightly different.
Is that, would the other analogy be the common cold? I have a cold, that's some sort of virus, but there's all sorts of things that make that up.
Yeah, I think the snowflakes might be a better example because when you look closely, they're all different. But from the further away, yeah, they're slightly all the same. They're all white, right? But yeah, it's fulvic acid's the same way. If you got a certain grouping in molecular weight, they're cell permeable and soluble at all pH. So they have similar chemical characteristics.
So if you go to the store or go online and you're looking at soil products, yours, Live Earth products, if somebody sees a package labeled humic acid, is that exclusively humic acid, or is that humic acid and fulvic acid, or humic acid and something else in it?
It depends. So there are some manufacturers that will isolate the humic from the fulvic. And there are some manufacturers that sell humic and fulvic together. So our humic solution is just humic and fulvic. We don't separate them off. And you can do that by the mechanism I mentioned earlier, where humic is only alkaline soluble. So what they'll do is they'll take a solution of humic solution that they've extracted, and they'll acidify it. When they acidify it, the humic will separate from the fulvic. The fulvic will be kind of amber colored, and the humic will all go to the bottom as a precipitate and settle out and be black. And then they'll sell them separate. And that allows them to high grade and get a higher amount of humic, but you take the fulvic away. So some products on the market are just that, just humic, no fulvic. And some are humic and fulvic combined.
What's your research say on having that blend? Do you leave it together because you feel that's the best deliverable for an agricultural setting, or some other reason?
Yeah, so the in my opinion, the fulvic acid is the rock star of the group, because it is cell permeable and soluble at all pH. It's able to get in the plant, do the work much quicker. The humic, it does have a benefit, and I wouldn't say one is better than the other, but sometimes when you're applying these products, let's say you applied just a humic product that had fulvic in it and fulvic alone, it's like you and me arguing which is better, vitamin C or orange juice, because one is a component of the other. You can't say one is better than the other, but the fulvic does a lot of the work, and I think people really attribute some of the benefits of a humic solution incorrectly, and the fulvic is actually the rock star in the group.
Do you think if you could only pick one, if you're looking at plants and let's say money or cost wasn't an object, availability is not an object, you would just go with fulvic?
For the most instances, yes, just because it it's versatile. But most people are using fulvic for foliar applications. I mean, our fulvic acid that we mine from our plant, we're one of the few manufacturers that sells food grade and pharmaceutical grade fulvic acid. These products are kosher. They're used by supplement companies in the dietary supplements. So that's part of what we do. But yeah, we're one of the few manufacturers that have this. We've got a nice sandstone cap on our deposit, so that those water soluble components weren't rinsed through. So we've got a really nice humic deposit with a high fulvic content. So yeah, we believe it, but we also have the benefit of a high fulvic content in our deposit.
The fulvic acid being used in supplements, cosmetics, what if somebody's putting in a supplement, what's the why behind that?
So we can get into the real dirty details here if you want, but the main thing about fulvic acid is fulvic acid has a high cation exchange capacity, right? So it has an affinity for positively charged ions. So what will happen is a lot of times fulvic acid will attach to those nutrients, and you'll see increased absorption. And you'll see this a lot of times even in agriculture, where we'll take let's say a zinc sulfate, for example, do a foliar application, and we get zinc in the plant. We take zinc sulfate, mix with fulvic acid, and we significantly increase the absorption of that nutrient. So sometimes the fulvic acid is kind of being used as, I call it a tortilla chip. What are you going to put on it? It's a mechanism for getting things into the system. So cosmetic companies will use our fulvic acid in conjunction with other things when they put it on their skin to increase absorption of that thing across the skin. It's not necessarily the fulvic that's doing the work, but usually something with the fulvic.
Yeah, the reason I ask is that, you see a lot of different additives in the agricultural space of things people can foliar spray on plants, broadcast on the ground. And it's always nice to know, like, hey, if I ate this, I'm going to survive it, where you can't say that with a lot of other substances.
Yeah, I will put my humic or fulvic up against any municipal waste or herbicide as far as human consumption. So the raw material, our raw humate, nothing changed, goes into the animal feed industry as a mineral supplement. And the reason is this is old plant material. This deposit behind me is just old plant material. So all the minerals that were in that plant material are still there. So they feed it as a broad spectrum mineral to get iron and some of these other minerals into their feed.
You think about the people listening to this and the why of using these. Is that the why of gardeners, market farmers is probably the primary audience listening to this? I apply humic substances to my fields to increase the mineralization content, like add more trace minerals that aren't there, or is there something else you think?
There's three components to the humates, and I would cover them each in turn real briefly. And the first one is the mineral profile, like you said. Yeah, it's rich in minerals. You're going to get those minerals back. In a highly leached soil, you're absolutely providing minerals. The other thing is humic substances are naturally a component of your soil organic matter. So the one thing that you're getting with the humic substances is you're hitting the fast forward button. So it took millions and millions of years to turn this plant material into what it is now. 50 pounds of humate equals about 1,500 pounds of compost or manure before that decomposition process. So if you could hit the fast forward button and get you some of that stable organic matter, that's a huge benefit. And the last thing is the physical characteristics on the soil. So when you put humic substances down in the soil, you're actually increasing your soil's ability to hold water and nutrients. And I'll throw out a number. This is from the USDA NRCS. And they state that a 1% change in soil organic matter will conserve 30,000 more gallons of water per acre. So if you had a rain event or some irrigation cycle and you were able to retain that much more water in the soil. Now, it doesn't make the soil more soggy. It just creates macropores and micropores where that water and nutrients can be stored. And that's the interesting thing is by increasing your soil's ability to attach these, create space for water, you're also creating space to hold nutrients. And we've got several university trials where we've applied humic acid with nitrogen, even less amounts of nitrogen, and got more yield out of it. And that's because that soil was able to hold those nutrients longer, give that plant a longer opportunity to use those nutrients.
So you have one component of that it's like a sponge, right? It's more of a physical thing. It's hey, I'm holding water, I'm creating pore space, I'm aggregating soil. The organic matter, just raising the organic matter, if we put that part of it aside, are microbes eating this as food? So is this a microbe food that you're also adding to the soil?
That's a really common question. It's actually they're connecting the wrong dots. So when you put humic substances down, a lot of people will see microbial activity go up. They say, wow, this is a great microbe food. But the truth is the humic substances have gone through their degradation process by microbes. It's not the first thing at the buffet that they want to eat. The humic substances are the paper plate at the buffet. They're going to eat everything else first. Microbes really don't want to eat humic substances. But humic substances aggregate things. So if you were a microbe in the soil and you were looking for things like air, oxygen, water, humic substances by forming those soil colloids in the aggregate create space for air, oxygen, and water. So you see increased microbial activity because of the environmental changes that occur with humic substances. A good friend of mine once described the humic substances as $1 million house for microbes. They're not eating the house, but that's surely where the party is happening. And I think that's the reason you add that is if you're facilitating microbial activity, humic substances are kind of that nexus.
If I had unlimited compost of high quality, is there any reason to look at humic substances, like concentrated humic substances like this versus just apply compost?
So I'll try to divide it out into two different categories. So we use humic substances. The first is the soil amendment, try to build organic matter. And if I had just a huge amount of compost, like you said, no, you're not adding organic matter. You've already got sufficient amount, right? So you're not adding a little bit of humic substances may not help you. What we found though is some of the extracts do elicit a biostimulant response. So if you even had a soil that had high organic matter and you applied a humic substance in a small amount to the plant leaf, you can see a biostimulant response. And we've seen this in cornfields in central Iowa, and some really in agriculture we describe them as ice cream ground. Really nice, loamy, rich soils, and you still see a response with humic substances when foliar applied. So yeah, I would categorize these in two different categories. One is acting as a biostimulant, and one is building your soil organic matter. The truth is adding a few gallons of humic acid foliar applied is never going to do anything to build your soil organic matter. It's a drop in the bucket. Just to quantify that number, if you took an acre of soil, 6 to 8 inches deep, from a farm field and pushed all that soil into one pile, you'd have about 2 million pounds of soil. So to change that 2 million pounds, 1%, that would be adding 20,000 pounds of pure organic matter. Now, the USDA indicates in their 1% program, they've got a program specifically on this topic, and it's a 1% challenge to change your soil organic matter 1%, they indicate you've got a 10-to-1 conversion. So for every 10 pounds of active organic matter you put down, you're going to end up with about 1 pound of passive organic matter. So stable organic matter that stays in the soil. So if you took that and applied it to your 20,000 pound figure I just threw at you, that's 200,000 pounds per acre of compost or manure you've got to put down to change your soil organic matter 1%. And that's just this huge amount of material that nobody's going to put down. There's just no way you've got 200,000 pounds of compost to put down. So to flip that over and say, okay, we're going to put 3 pounds of humic acid down and change things, it's not accurate. You know, we're applying that product at those rates because we're seeing a biostimulant response. You're applying the granular humate at higher rates to build your soil organic matter. So to your example, yeah, if you got a whole bunch of compost, humate's not going to be adding a whole lot of organic matter benefit. Some of the benefits you get from humate that you might not consider, humate's pH 3.0, so you get some acidity. There's a little bit of iron, sulfur, and trace minerals you might not have in the compost. And so we still see people add humate in small amounts, maybe like 10 pounds per cubic yard, and still add it to their compost or manures.
Do you find that, I guess, I mean, the answer is going to be varies, but let me figure out the best way to say this. Is foliar application maybe one of the better ways to use this then?
Yeah, so it's kind of it's like having a bucket full of hammers and saying which one's the best for the job. And the same thing is true of these humic substances, is sometimes you're using humic substances just for nutrient delivery. Sometimes we're using them to increase absorption. I'm in the Mountain West here, and a lot of times what we're dealing with is salts. You know, we've got high salts in our soil, we've got high salts in our water. And so a lot of guys are injecting humic substances with their water to simply just soak up some of those salts. Now, you got to remember, humic substances have an affinity for all positively charged ions, right? Calcium, potassium, ammonium, sodium. It doesn't say, you know, sodium's not allowed. They're all positively charged, so they can be attracted to the humic molecule. So we're using these tools in different ways. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes we're using them to attach divalent and trivalent metal ions like iron and zinc to increase absorption. So it's a tool, and you've got to look at how you're using it. Let's say I'm in Florida and I've got a really low CEC soil, so a real sandy type soil with low retention. This is a good point. Live Earth Products has been on the Rose Bowl Stadium since 2006. You know, why is that? The Rose Bowl can afford as much fertilizer as they want. It's the Rose Bowl Stadium. But the problem is that stadium is built on about 15 inches of pure silica sand. They have virtually no nutrient retention in that soil. So they're adding humic substances like our humic acid with the fertility to make that fertility last longer. So those are how you use these tools.
It's a binding to it.
Yeah, it's people will say chelation, but technically it's complexing. It's complexing that nutrient. And the thing is, this normally occurs in your soil anyways. So humic substances are in every soil, everywhere. When you're applying a humic substance, it's like playing musical chairs and adding more chairs to the game. You're increasing spots where those nutrients can be held.
So if let's say I was spraying any other nutrient foliarly, I would benefit by putting fulvic acid in that spray by increasing absorption.
Yeah. So humic or fulvic. So in my college years, I was a professional applicator. I went out and squirted lawns. That's all I did, you know, after I got out of class. And my mix was nitrogen, a pinch of phosphorus, some iron chelate, sometimes an herbicide like 2,4-D, and then humic acid. And you always saw better absorption by applying the humic acid with it. It's really a nice carrier to aid in absorption. And I kind of referenced this earlier. My background's agronomy, so we do a lot of university testing. And corn was one where we were actually trying to make that nutrient last longer, because that's one of their biggest expenses is nitrogen. And when you apply humic acid with the nitrogen lasts longer. That plant gets a longer opportunity to absorb that. Our University of Tennessee trials, we got 20 more bushels of corn out of the same amount of nitrogen. That's only because that plant had a longer opportunity to absorb that nitrogen before it was lost to the environment. So that's what you're really doing with humic substances and why you're using them. You're trying to get that plant a longer opportunity to absorb these deliverables that you're presenting it.
If I, a lot of times you see humic acid, maybe this is all the time, correct me. Humic acid, it comes in like granules. Can you soak that in water? Now you said it needs to be an acidic water or gelify. So let's say an acidic water and turn it into a liquid.
Yeah. So humic substances are categorized in three solubilities. You have water soluble, you have alkaline soluble, and then you have insoluble components. So if you took a raw humate, this is, and when I say raw humate, that hasn't had anything added to it, and put it in a bucket of water, you would solubilize just the fulvic. If you brought the pH up by adding some type of hydroxide, you would then solubilize the humic value. Some manufacturers sell products that are in granular form that already have that combined. So you see the hydroxide, the alkaline agent mixed in with the humate. So when you add it to water, it automatically solubilizes. So some people will use the term activated, but that's essentially what they're doing is they're adding something that will help extract it to the humate. So you have raw humate and then raw humates with the additives that will solubilize. I'm a the I'm trying to say this politely, but the misconception that humates have to be activated to be useful is incorrect. If all of our organic matter had to be soluble to be useful, then almost all of our soil organic matter would be useless. So the only thing that the solubility of humic substances in a soil application does is that it can create a biostimulant and it can help it get deeper in the soil. But humic substances don't need to be soluble to work. It's like saying soil organic matter has to be soluble to work, and that's not true. All of our
Right,
soil
right.
organic, it's a misnomer. But yeah, that generally you see two granular products. One would be granular raw humate. One would be granular humate with some alkaline agent added to them.
I guess getting organic matter deeper down, there's a few ways one can realistically do that. One is through just plants over time. The roots are going to go down there, plant dies off, roots stay, organic matter is now deeper. One thing you can't do without an insane amount of tillage would be get that compost down there. So if you wanted to deepen the organic matter level in soils, you have to do it in a form that's soluble, but so it can flow through the pore space and permeate down to those lower levels, right?
So yeah, but the one misconception is that people don't realize how much compost manure is lost as CO2. So in the first year, your soil microbes will convert 60 to 80% of that compost back to the air as CO2.
Because you're adding now humic acid, this is like the final stage of it all.
Right.
Like
It's
that
already
that
gone through that decomposition process. And so that you're not emitting, you put 100 pounds of humate down, you're going to get 100 pounds, 95 or whatever pounds of humate the next year. You're not seeing that degradation because when you're putting down compost, you've got cellulose, hemicellulose, all those things that microbes love. So a lot of that degradation is just those microbes destroying it and eating it up and converting it to CO2. So yeah, the getting it down in the soil is going to come through like root exudates and microbes, eating it, moving, and then dying. Those soluble components slowly leaching down through. Um, it takes time, but yeah, that's how it doesn't it doesn't decrease the value of adding organic matter to the surface.
for people at home that like to tinker, do you think you can realistically extract humates from compost that you make by taking compost and then doing what?
Yeah, so the one thing you got to remember is it's kind of like a rainbow. Um, how much humic acid is in compost? Well, a teeny bit. Maybe like 2 or 3% or something. These small amounts. So yeah, you could extract humic and fulvics if the compost was slightly aged. Is that you got to remember that the humic and fulvics are components of that final degradation process. So compost is kind of the beginning of the process. It's like saying, when does an apple turn into compost? Well, it doesn't happen. It's not like this definitive line. It's a gradation. And so, yeah, compost will have some small amounts of humic substances in them. It's the beginning of the process.
I'm just looking at a chart here showing different sources of humic acid. There's vermicompost, there's leonardite, which you mentioned before, organic waste, lignite, zeolite. What would your deposit fall into? Like, how would you classify that again?
Yeah, so a geologist might describe it as a brown coal. And technically, it's called a humic shale, and it would be similar to leonardite. So some of these deposits are oxidized lignites, where they've naturally oxidized, and not been coal or actually beyond coal. It's shiny coal that's actually been broken down further, like your leonardites. But
So leonardite, if you go to a lot of garden centers, that's one that you'll tend to see a lot of. What's the difference between what you have and that? I know you mentioned there's a more clay component,
yeah, clay
but
component mostly. Yeah, they're of similar age. The Utah deposit, I would assert, that has a little higher fulvic value. And the thing is, having a higher humic number and a lower humic number versus a higher humic number might be not as measurable if you have a higher fulvic number. So where we might lack in humic, where we have a lot more fulvic. So it's kind of a teeter-totter. As you get, more fulvic, you might have a little bit less humic. We have a nice combination, I think.
just going to do a search right here. Just pulling up Amazon. You search for humic acid on Amazon, you're getting like 500 results, all sorts of things. Granular humic acids through ones that are definitely been liquefied in the jug. If I'm sourcing this and I'm a newbie, I'm looking at this. My first thought is, what's the difference? There's tons of them here. They all have, crazy logos and all sorts of jargon associated with them. Having worked in the industry, being on the board of the industry that promotes these substances, how do you, as a consumer, differentiate between quality so you know what you're getting?
So the answer is much more complicated on the fulvic side than the humic side. And we'll get into that in detail if you want. But
Sure. Yeah. Let's take the humic side, I'll give you an example. So we sell a humic acid called Liquid 6. You can see it there on Amazon. And the Liquid 6, that same product, I split the sample into 4 different samples, and I sent it to 4 different labs. Now, there's actually multiple tests out there for humic substances. So if I was a new consumer saying, okay, I want to learn about this, the biggest problem you're going to run into is there's no standardization in testing. And when you buy a bag of nitrogen fertilizer, that nitrogen fertilizer has a standard across all 50 states. With humic substances, that isn't the case yet. So that split sample that I sent off to 4 different labs, it came in 14%, 7.5%, 6.5%, and 0%, but 9% fulvic acid. That was the same product. That was one product divided into 4 different jars and sent off to different labs. That's how broad of a range you can get. So as if you were in the marketing department of some of these, humic acid companies, and you said, look, if we can go with the bigger number, we're going to get more sales. People are going to say, well, same dollar per, this one's $5, this one's $5, and this one's 6%, and this one's 12%. I'm going to buy the 12% because I'm getting twice as much active ingredient. And it could simply be that they're using a different test method, same product. So that's the biggest misrepresentation. Now, the Human Product Trade Association has gone through and developed a standard. It says the HPTA test method certified seal. It's kind of a diamond shaped seal, and it's green. What it does is it tells the consumer, when you flip over that bag, you see that seal, and all of a sudden you don't have to be a humic acid test method specialist. You can just look at the bag and say, it's got the seal. There we go.
Because the problem in some of these tests is like ash content, for example. Some tests do not remove the ash. So when you acidify a humic solution and you go to weigh it and measure it, those suspended clays that are in there come with it. And so when you analyze it, those suspended clays get measured with the humic value. When you subtract the ash, those suspended clays are then removed, and you get a true humic value. That's what the HPTA test does. So it puts everybody on the even playing field and removes some of those impurities that were being measured as a humic and fulvic acid. So from a consumer standpoint, to directly answer your question, look for the seal. That's the number one thing you can do is look and say, this one's a HPTA test method seal. You can go to the HPTA certification website, scroll down the list, you'll see a list of manufacturers and who are certified. That's the quickest and easiest way to do it. Now, this certification program is just barely being launched. So you're not going to see that many products being out there. But as this becomes more of a thing and more adoption, because this was just barely released, you're going to see more and more of these seals out there, and then just look for the seal. That's going to be the number one thing a consumer can do to inform themselves.
Okay, let's come back to the fulvic acid part in a minute. So I'm not going to say the brand here, but here's one popular, and it says naturally occurring, unadulterated, oxidized lignite occurring 50% total humic acids, crushed, screened, and graded to particle size of 1 to 3 millimeters. When you hear something like that, does that seem normal?
For me, yeah. But crushed and screened, it's just a raw material that's been crushed and screened, and your SGN size is a measurement in millimeters. So an SGN for a golf course might be like, fairways 150 to 250. So that's 1.5 millimeter to 2.5 millimeter. So yeah, that's a normal industry product.
But if it says something like 50% total humic acids, that's normal? Like, what's the other 50%?
Right. So the 50% could be other organic acids that don't test as humic. So it could be human. The things that's the problem is you're not measuring all of the active ingredients there. And I had a regulator once ask me, Russ, are you throwing the baby out with the bathwater here? And the answer is maybe. We don't know the active ingredient. If you went to the International Humic Substance Society meeting, it's going on right now in Chile. And if you said, we know exactly what humic acid is, we know exactly what's our active ingredient, that room would just laugh. And they would, because you got these categories of organic acids that we're just barely figuring out what they do and how to measure them. So yeah, that 50%, it just gives you an idea that this should be a credible product that has a certain amount of material in there that is beneficial. The other 50% could be organic acids, it could be clays, it could be minerals. It's just not measured as humic acid.
And you're involved in the industry pretty deeply. Do you have a sense of how trustworthy it is? Like, are most brands on the up and up, would you say? I mean, you're not going to know everyone, I get it, but
For the longest time, and when we started as a founding member back in 2010, I hate to say it, but there was some snake oil salesmen out there. That anything that was black was a humic substance. The problem is still persisting in the fulvic acid industry. So the problem with the fulvic acid industry is the test, and we're working on fixing that. But right now, the test is only looking for specific markers because these organic acids are hard to identify, right? The best example I can give you of the problem is this. Imagine I had two glasses in front of me. They were both full of, one was full of grape juice, one was full of wine. And I told you these products are exactly the same. They both come from grapes. They're red. These are the exact same products. And if you had a drink of one and then the other, and you're expecting wine and you got grape juice, you'd be like, this is completely different. There's the process of fermentation where the microbes convert those sugars to alcohols is meaningful to the wine drinker. The same thing is true in the fulvic acid industry. A lot of these inputs are being sold as fulvic acid because they trick the test. So you're seeing corn steep liquor, lignosulfonates, soybean extracts. There's even some paper pulping wastes that are being sold as fulvic acid. And they've not gone through that microbial degradation. And that microbial process, just like the fermentation process in making wine, makes that product different. So the problem is in the tests. Anything that can be tested as fulvic acid is automatically fulvic acid. So we had one of the regulators, they were kind of joking and they ran a bunch of things through the column just to test and see what, faked the test as fulvic acid. And things like malathion we're actually testing as fulvic acid. Now imagine if somebody was just selling malathion and claiming it as being 80% fulvic acid, how problematic that would be for the industry. And then that's really what's going on is anything that tests as fulvic is getting sold as fulvic. So I think your bigger problem in the industry, if you were to say, Russ, where are the bad players? It's in the fulvic side. The humic side is fairly, it's as we get the tests removing the ash content, and that's the biggest problem in the humic test is the ash content. That will help standardize our humic industry. But the fulvic industry is really problematic because they're selling things that aren't even humified as fulvic.
I think for like granular, if somebody's selling humic acid, that there's a pretty good chance at this point that you're at least getting that.
Yeah, absolutely. The granular products, the only real difference, as I mentioned earlier, is some people are selling a granulated product that is raw material has not been had any hydroxides added to it, and some are selling granular products that have hydroxides added to it. And really, in your mind, you need to look at those products as a liquid because they have the rates are lower, and the reasons their rates are lower is because they're trying to get that product to act like a biostimulant. They're really not trying to build soil organic matter or anything else with those soluble granular humates. That's basically a granulated form of a liquid. It's not a granular product designed to build soil organic matter.
What about the liquid forms that it's sold in? Is that pretty standardized process where you're getting, I guess you're not buying a bunch of water?
Yeah. So the thing with humic is it has a real high cation exchange capacity, as I was mentioning. But what happens is they get too crowded against each other and they start sticking to each other. And so you start making your solutions too strong and you just get a big old glop. You won't even get a liquid anymore. So anything above 12, you've really got to scratch your head and say, yeah, they might be having a little extra ash content in there or something else. But these high numbers beyond 12 it's really hard to get and not have a viscous liquid that's just so reactive. It's like Caro syrup or something. You just can only put so much sugar in a jar before it's not a liquid anymore.
Yeah, and just it's interesting when you start digging into this, all the different sources and things. So again, going back to the background behind you, is it as simple as break it up, scoop it up, screen it, bag it up?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, when we make our fulvic acid, people ask us, how do you make your fulvic acid? And I say it's a really complicated process. We take the ore, we put it in the tanks, we add water. And they're like, so what else do you add? And we're like, nothing. If you have a good quality ore, that's all you need to do is make your fulvic. Now, some people will add all these different acids and citric acid, and it really depends on the quality of your ore. But yeah, our raw material, our humate soil conditioner that you see there on Amazon, that's just raw ore that's been screened and granulated. And there's nothing being added in the granulation process but water. So you couldn't get more pure than that unless you want to come dig it out yourself.
How do you view, or how does the industry view the sustainability of these deposits? Peat has become under pressure a lot in the last 20 years as being non-renewable, depending on how you view that. What do you think about the humic substances?
So humic substances are the end result of decomposition. So if we want more humic substances, get more feedstuffs and get more decomposition. They are renewable. The deposits we're mining, these are old ancient deposits, and yeah, they're a finite resource. But yeah, humic substances can be made from any plant. There's a big push, to make biochar out of everything lately. But I would say, people are really ignoring the pyrolysis process and what benefit it provides to the soil. But yeah, we could take some of all those feedstuffs that are going to pyrolysis process and make more humic substances.
Is there a way that can you do that now industrially?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically really, really old compost. So usually most people are using just selling the compost and let the humification occur in the soil. But
So
yeah, it's
there's no like mechanized way. I mean, it might be like insanely energy intensive, but you couldn't put it into some sort of device, compress it, or do whatever, and come out with concentrated humic or fulvic acid.
um not that I'm aware of. A lot of these like in vessel fermentation and things like that is kind of what you're talking about, and most of those are just um extracts. But yeah, I've never seen a commercial one where they try and take compost and reduce it further. Most people are just selling the compost. I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze there as far as energy and inputs and work. Throw the compost out, let the microbes do their thing, and improve your soil.
So look at the products you have in the agricultural spectrum. There's three. There's the live earth soil conditioner. There's the LM32 Ag and the Liquid 6. For farmers and gardeners, which one should they look at, or which ones?
So the soil conditioner is obviously the raw material that is designed for building soil organic matter. That's the reason you use it. The liquid humic acid is primarily to be used with your water for like newly established plants, um, trying to loosen up the soil, soil conditioning properties like for compaction. That's generally how they're using that one. And the fulvic acid, or LM32, is generally used for foliar application. Now, I've got nut growers in Central Valley, California that inject fulvic acid right down their lines for one reason and one reason only. It helps clean up their emitter heads. They actually get less calcium building up on their emitter heads when they add fulvic acid to the line. So, there's no hard and fast rule for how to use these products. I think that using fulvic acid for soil application is kind of like using tenderloin to make hamburger. It's probably not the best use of that ingredient, but does it make really good hamburger? Yeah. So it's just a matter of how you use these tools. Humic acid in a liquid form, as I mentioned, has a real high affinity for positively charged ions. So you could think of all the delivery mechanisms for that. So trying to stabilize ammonium, for example, that's one way of mixing it with your nitrogen fertilizers. I've got people in Idaho that use it with their phosphate fertilizers. And you're probably saying, Russ, how does it affect an anion? Well, what happens is the free calcium in these calcareous soils will attach to the phosphorus and reduce phosphorus availability. So if you put humic acid out with that fertilizer, that calcium will attach to the humic just as readily as it will the phosphate, and you get more net available phosphorus. So you kind of get, there's no one specific application, but you've just got to look at this as a tool. Now, how could I use this tool? We're creating space in the soil. What does it do? Does it store nutrients? Does it help salt go away? And we're not doing anything different than what Mother Nature's already done. It's part of every soil organic matter. So we're just trying to kind of make these soils act a little bit less like hard clay soils.
So for, let's say, a basic gardener that just wants to get started, the live earth soil conditioner,
Yeah, yeah.
apply
So
that.
anytime you got an opportunity to use live earth soil conditioner, I mentioned Rose Bowl earlier, and I'll mention them again. When they resawed that field, they resawed that field 2 to 3 times a year. And when they resawed that field, they put the humate down before they do the sod. We got a little YouTube video on that. But yeah, that's one way of doing it, is to get the sod out. So if I was doing a yard and I said, hey, what can I do to really improve this soil? First thing I do is going to do is throw out some humate and rake it in. Some people get real overboard about I got to till it in and do all these things. Our local high school, they did their ball field, and this will kind of be an eye-popping number, but they put 12 tons of humate down per acre on that ball field. And that's a legacy application. They're never ever going to be able to, dig up the football field and put it in again. It was a small county, ball field. But that soil organic matter will retain nutrients and improve water retention for decades. So that product will pay for itself in water conservation alone. Not to mention the other things like transplant loss. A lot of my landscape guys use humate in their holes. They dig their holes, take a little handful of humate in every hole, mix it in the backfill, plant the plants, and then put that in there. We did a water-wise planting in Salt Lake City with the city of Taylorsville, actually. And We didn't lose a single plant. No, I think we lost one out of like thousands of plants that went into this planting. So transplant loss, there's all kinds of benefits for using these organic acids and improving the soil around these plants. So that's how you use granular. You try to get more soil incorporation. After an aerification in the spring, before that freeze thaw action in the winter. A lot of people discount that, but in the winter, that soil is freezing and thawing and freezing and thawing. It actually creates a little bit of soil movement. You can actually put some soil amendments on there and kind of get them to work in a little bit. So those are good times to use the granulars. The liquids, you've really got to think why. I'm trying to break up the compacted soil. I'm trying to help with loosen the soil up, retain nutrients, and try to get this plant's roots established. That's usually when they're using liquids.
So let's say somebody has a compacted soil and they want
Mhm.
to start applying a liquid humate to it. What's the rate you think they need to apply, and how, over what period of time, until they start seeing some results?
So when I was a professional applicator, I would do 6 to 8 ounces per 1,000 square feet 3 times a year. And you could divide that out, say, I want to go every 2 weeks, go 2 ounces every 2 weeks, whatever, your delivery time. But that's one of them. One way of doing it is just about 6 ounces 3 times a year, 6 to 8 ounces. That's kind of a high line number. I wouldn't go any more than that. I call it my shots of whiskey theory or my scoops of ice cream theory, one of those two. But one's good, two's twice as good, three. Somewhere along the line, too much of a good thing is no longer a good thing. So,
You know, multivitamins maybe not beneficial for some people depending on their diet. Let's say you already have a healthy diet, right? That multivitamins kind of just insurance at the end of the day. For people who have soils that are high in organic matter, they apply their own compost, they use cover crops, they keep living roots in the soil, so their soils are already really good. Do you think you get much of a bump from using any of this?
there is a little bit of diminishing return. The better your soil is, the least demand you'll need for these is a soil amendment. And the reason is you're adding something that's already in abundant supply. You're adding humic acids because that soil is low in organic acids. If you got a soil that's high in organic acids, generally, it's a diminishing returns. The ones that see the benefit in the high organic matter soils are usually foliar application, where they're applying the humic acid as a biostimulant. And there's some really interesting research, and I'll give you one example. This was a cornfield in Illinois. And the researcher, his name is Dr. Dan Olk, they had a weather event, and they had one section of the corn treated with humic acid, and one section of the corn did not. And the weather event had taken and it lodged the corn, it laid it down. So it damaged the corn and was no longer standing up. What was interesting, though, is it laid it down to a line where the humic acid applied and where it was not applied. And they started looking at it and saying, okay, well, we've watched enough Sesame Street. We know one of these things is not like the other, so what's the difference? And they started looking at it. And what they found was the corn plants had more internodal roots earlier on. So those roots that kind of anchored that plant and helped that plant build its root structure out were in more abundant supply. So in that instance, it was foliar applied to the plant. And we know that even though it was a rich organic matter soil, we weren't really affecting the soil at that point. We were somehow stimulating that plant to either absorb more nutrients or make more nutrients available. Something was going on to cause that plant to be able to root better. And it could have been something as simple as phosphorus availability. We don't know the mode of action. What we do know is through a failed test plot, because the test plot was ruined at that point, but we did know that there was something occurring there, and it led us to start looking for other things. And we see the increased rooting ability in some of these plants. So, yeah, if you've got a soil that is rich in organic matter, a soil application is probably not the right tool for you. But a foliar application might be the exact tool that you need to make these products ideal for your situation. Just remember, again, one is good, two is twice as good, three, somewhere along the way, you're not getting more benefit. And what we've actually seen in our university trials is what they call hormetic curve, where you get a growth response to a certain point and then it starts falling off. So, 4 or 5 gallons the acre might be too much. Around 3 gallons an acre might be the ideal spot for, applicators. So, that's, good where we kind of base our numbers at 6 to 8 ounces per 1,000 square feet.
So a couple experiments people could do is one, if you're already applying something foliarly, isolate one row or one section, add fulvic acid to your application, apply that to one section, do the other section normally no fulvic acid, and see if you see a difference between the two.
Yep. And that's sometimes your observation might not be what you were looking for. Like the corn trial I was mentioning, where the roots, they weren't initially looking at the roots. And what he's also seen in subsequent years where the humic acid was applied and we didn't see much of a result, but it was a really wet year with abundant rain. But on the droughty years, all of a sudden they saw really significant results. So, is it helping that plant root out further? And in the years where it has abundant rain, you don't need the humic? Quite possibly. We're still, if you had a humic acid researcher in the room and asking these questions, hey, we got this nailed down, they're going to say, yeah, no, we're still learning. But we do know that, these products do have a nice effect, particularly with the nutrients, and that's the ideal time to use them.
If you zoom out, where do humic substances fall on the cost per acre chart? If you think of everything from nitrogen fertilizers to kelps to fish hydrosylates to biochars, where does humic substances sit?
On the very low end of the scale. I mean, these are easily acquired, as far as mining these materials. They're not hard to make. They're not nearly as expensive some as your fertilizers. You shouldn't be hundreds of dollars per acre like your fertilizers. They're, a normal application of humic acid might be like $40 per acre.
So it's good potential insurance. Like, it's not that expensive to give it a shot, see if you see results. And again, not all those results are observable. And that's part of the problem with a lot of amendments. I think why a lot of them get bad raps. And I've talked to other guests about this, is you apply it and we visually can't see a difference, right? If I could dye the plant and have it absorb a blue ink and I could see the blue ink run through the plant, it's like, okay, I see cause and effect. Or if I apply some sort of amendment, stuff could be happening, stuff could not be happening that I can see, I can't see. I just don't know. And I think when people can't see it or touch it, I don't think they're gonna be able to taste it. Then they start to say, like, yeah, is this worth it? The effort, the money, the time, I don't know.
I can tell you on the marginal soils, we usually see the difference. That's the time where it makes the difference. That corn trial I've referenced a few times, though, I'll tell you this. We had multiple years of doing this. In the most recent year, we actually did granular urea, and we went with on a per acre rate of 210 without any humic acid or a urease inhibitor. And we went 180 again with nothing added to it. And then we went 150 pounds per acre with a urease inhibitor. And if listeners are not familiar with what a urease inhibitor does, it slows down the conversion of urea to a usable form of nitrogen for the plant. So what happens is the microbes will break down urea into ammonium. And if it happens too quickly, the plant can't use it. It just goes off the air as a gas. And so you want to slow that reaction down so that the plant has a longer opportunity to use it. So what we found, and this is very common knowledge, that the urease inhibitor at 150 pounds per acre yielded more corn than the 210 pounds of urea. So what happened is that nitrogen was available to that plant longer, even though there was less nitrogen applied. And we got a bushel increase, about 10 bushels per acre. Now, when we added the humic acid separate, so you've got 210 pounds of urea versus 150 and 180, the 150 got more bushels of corn. And then when we added the humic acid, we got 10 more bushels on top of that. That is $75 per acre benefit. So what they were able to do is reduce their fertility by almost 25% and get the same, actually better result, $75 per acre and about 20 more bushels of corn. So that's not, unique to any, instance. We see that year over year on different crops. So if I was looking at this as a tool and saying, hey, you know, how could I use this and make it a benefit to me? Usually it's through some type of conservation. So using humic substances, we're going to make that pantry in the soil bigger. So we're storing things that we might lose, like water or nutrients. And so sometimes using your humic substances might spread out your irrigation cycles. Might You might see other things benefit. So I had one guy who actually he said, "Man, this humic substance works like a fungicide." We're like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 wait! The humic substances don't do anything to kill fungus." He says, "No, no, I was able to use the humic substances, and I changed my irrigation cycles, and now my fungus went away." And what it was the ground was less wet and creating an environment for the fungus to grow, and so therefore he didn't have to use the fungicide. So he got a budget savings by changing the environment that was favorable for fungal growth. So sometimes you're going to see these little side benefits like water conservation, nutrient retention, or reducing, fungal favorable environments. There's going to be a saving somewhere and a reason for using it.
If I apply it granularly to the soil surface, how much water do I have to get on it over time to have it break down and dissolve? Is that going to go relatively quickly into the soil matrix, or is it going to take a while?
There's some components that will never solubilize. The humin, which is insoluble, and the humic, which is only alkaline soluble. The fulvic is going to solubilize, and so you would use that over a normal watering cycle. And you might see stuff on the surface, 6 months to a year later, but it's usually the humin and those humic components. The
So
water soluble, yeah, the water soluble component should be already in the ground and doing its thing.
if it's granular, I'm probably better applying it either before tillage, or if I dig a hole when I put a plant in to put it down that way. That way I can get it down where the roots are.
Yeah, there's never a bad time to get it down. Get it down when you can afford it and it's convenient. But ideal is more soil incorporation, the better. I mean, I've got turf guys who put, 10 pounds or 5 pounds per 1,000 square feet, and they do it in the spring, and that's all they ever do. Um, the ideal situation is like after an aerification, or sometimes you've got some, soil disturbance. That's the more ideal.
Do you have nurseries using it in potting mixes?
Yeah, yeah, about 10 pounds per cubic yard. They'll mix it in there.
Right on. Well, this has been, well, before I end it, let me ask, is there anything I missed before I close it out? I think I hit everything on my list.
Yeah, no, excellent questions. I think the general use rates, how people are using them. You've covered all that. I think you're good.
Okay, I'll give you a chance to plug and we'll wrap it up.
Sure.
All right. Well, I think that really wraps it up. Hopefully that answers everybody's questions that they've had for all these years about humic and fulvic acids. For people that want to find your products, they can go to liveearth.com. Is there anywhere else you'd send them for more information?
Yeah, so our products are regionally available here in the Western United States. So Live Earth, you can get it at some of your local farmer co-ops and irrigation supply companies. Most of those that you'd be able to get our humate from. If you're in a area that doesn't have that available, you can always get it on Amazon. If you're one of those folks, you could just click and buy. It's available on Amazon. But yeah, Live Earth is spelled with one E. It's LIVEARTH.com. Live Earth is a family business. I do also represent the industry as the Humic Product Trade Association president. So feel free to reach out to me. I am an industry advocate. If you call up, say, Russ, I got questions about humic substances, that one thing you said, I'll put on my industry hat. I won't try to sell you anything. I'll tell you what I know about the industry. I am that guy going to DC, meeting with regulators. So I'm pretty well connected, and if I don't know the answer, I can get it for you.
All right, there we go. Right on. All right. Are you, you see a lot of humic acids in other mixes. Do you supply a lot of companies that, small box and stuff like that?
Some, we do some. Like Zamzows in Idaho, I probably do 60 truckloads of material for them, and it's their product. Not even my name's not anywhere on that product. So yeah, we do a lot of raw ingredient suppliers. I've seen an uptick in the people asking me about biochars and humates and how they compare, but we didn't get that in the conversation, but happy to dive down that well if you ever want to discuss that.
Hmm. Do you guys white label?
Yeah, yeah,
You can do that.
yeah, absolutely. Our only metric is our name is on the check. So um,
And then the drop shipping, that's something that's definitely
yeah,
possible.
yeah. UPS shows up every day here to get the Amazon orders, and I have yeah, there's a couple people that have us drop ship right out here.
What do you think makes the most sense? Like if knowing like my customer base is market gardeners, that type of thing, is it the liquid product or
The Liquid Six and the soil conditioner, and the soil conditioner I have available in 5 pound bags in a 3 pack, so you get 15 pounds of soil conditioner, and that's fairly easy to ship. The critical thing on the granular humates is shipping 50 pounds. I've pressure tested this every which way possible, and the only way I can ship that economically is through UPS flat rate. I can get 50 pounds in an extra large box for $26
hmm, okay.
shipped anywhere in the United States. And that's the cheapest you'll get a 50-pound bag shipped. And so that's the hard part about the granular in 50-pound bags is that shipping. And that's just our raw cost. I don't have anything added to that. It's like 26.05 a bag.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, but the smaller quantities, like the 5 pound bags for the home gardener and things like that, that's usually a lot easier to move out. I think it's like $16 for 15 pounds. And there's actually a couple of newer USPS things that we're exploring that, are fairly close to that also.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, yeah,
But
I'll
the liquids,
definitely
yeah, the liquids are probably your best bet as far as cost per unit.
like the liquid six and
Yeah, liquid six.
okay, this other one's a turf one. I was looking at the blitz, but that's for
Yeah, the Blitz
turf.
is a fun one. I designed that formula when I was an applicator in college, and they wanted to call it the Rose Bowl formula. But the problem is, if we ever kind of split, they kind of keep that name. So we
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
got a little football theme going.
All right, right on. Well, thanks for doing it. I'll keep you posted in terms of when this airs. It's going to be over the fall. We're just recording episodes now. Everything will start out once the weather starts to cool down and people start really listening to this stuff again. So October time is, I think, when the next set of episodes will kick off. So this
Cool.
will be in the next batch, but appreciate it. I mean, before you go to, is there anybody else you'd recommend talking to? Humic acid or just anything soil related. Could be other amendments, could be anything.
Um, there's a lot going on in this industry as far as biostimulants, and what people have to realize is the problem with the Federal Insecticide and Fungicide and Rodenticide Act is it was designed in the 1940s and 50s. And the technology that we have now, the best example I can give you is think of like the Tesla versus the 1950s Model T Ford, right? How much has technology changed? And the laws haven't changed. So when they designed these laws in the 1950s, what happened is they captured everything. Everything is a pesticide. And they exempted those portions out that they were not known to be pesticides. So nutrients were exempted. Vitamins and hormones were later exempted for horticultural use. Soil amendments were exempted. And then there was another category called nutritional chemicals, which was exempted but never defined. So that is unavailable to industry. What's changing is just this week, the group called AFCO, which is the American Association of Plant Food Control Officials, voted to move a bill to finalize it that would allow biostimulant claims in the states. So what that does is it allows manufacturers to make claims that are beyond nutritive value. So right now, if you make a claim, anything that accelerates or retards plant growth that is not a macronutrient nor a micronutrient is a pesticide. So humic substances and all those things you mentioned earlier, the soil amendments, all those things, if they weren't applied directly to soil, if they're applied to a plant, they can be considered a pesticide. So what's going to change is what manufacturers can label. So you're going to see labels for like heat stress and abiotic stress and root stimulators that weren't able to be claimed before will be able to be claimed. So you're going to see this genesis, this change in the industry where industry can actually talk about what these products really do.
Hmm.
And it's exciting for people, homeowners and long, let's say you were somewhere in California and it was just stupid hot. And you're like, gosh, I wish I had a product that was help with heat stress. You can't buy a product for that right now. But in the future, you'll see labels that have that on it. So you're seeing a huge change in the biostimulant industry. Um, and there's one final piece of the puzzle that is out there. I wrote an article on this in Acres USA magazine. There's an act in Congress called the Plant Biostimulant Act, and that was introduced by Panetta and the others. There was a senator and Padilla. I get them mixed up. But those two, there's a Senate bill and a House bill. But what that does is it takes these plant biostimulants and moves them out of the pesticide category and into the soil amendment and fertilizer category. Because right now they're all being regulated potentially as pesticides.
That's interesting. That'd be cool to
Yeah.
follow.
So it's going to get real exciting. All these soil amendments and all these things that we've kind of been well, it'll aid nutrients and things like that. That seems to be our hook. But we're actually going to get to talk about these benefits. What's funny is that law is written so poorly. If you claimed that water, now it's neither a macronutrient nor micronutrient, and if you applied water to a plant and accelerated plant growth, could be considered a pesticide under this law. That's how poorly it was written. So there's going to be some really interesting things that are going to come out of this that we can manufacturers start talking about these products. So yeah, you're going to find a lot of fodder for the biostimulant industry and people selling biostimulants that can really get excited to talk about what we're doing.
Yeah, it's how far away do you think that is? Is that like the next 5 years or sooner than
Oh
that?
no, the act is in Congress, so AFCO has already done their part. So there's no nexus at the federal level for fertilizer regulation. Everything happens at the state level. The only thing the feds have control of is pesticides. And so you've got this gray area where biostimulants were neither a pesticide nor a fertilizer. And so it's hot potato, like who's gonna keep track of it? So now all that has to happen is, since the states have said, no, we build a category for it, we got a model bill, we got all the rules in place to regulate these like a fertilizer. All the feds have to do is vote on the bill in Congress. Say, look,
Mm.
this is not a pesticide, and it goes to the states. So it's the bill is out there. People, it can go on the farm bill if it gets enough support. So it's exciting stuff.
That's cool. Right on.
Yeah, we've worked really hard. I don't People in the industry don't realize how much work's gone into this, but we're pretty proud of it. I'd like to think we're a leader in the industry. We really make some cool products, and humic substances, are part of that biostimulant industry. And it would be really cool to be able to talk about the benefits of these products and what they do for the industry, and not have it be restricted by what's going on in the pesticide law. So that's going to change. It's going to be really exciting for the humic industry.
Awesome. Well, good luck. Fingers crossed.
Thanks.